This happened a few winters ago, about 6 months after I finalized my divorce. To put it lightly, I needed a reset. Christina, my girlfriend at the time, suggested we take a trip somewhere quiet, far away from the chaos I'd been dealing with. We found a rental cabin on a lake in upstate New York and booked it for a week without much thought. The place turned out to be exactly what I needed. A modern, but cozy house right on the lake, surrounded by woods with only a handful of other properties scattered along the shoreline. Most of them were empty. It wasn't peak season for lakefront living, and that was perfect. I wanted to be as far from civilization as possible. The host wasn't going to be there, but he gave us detailed instructions where to find the keys, some notes about the house, the usual Airbnb stuff. When we arrived in the morning, there was a small package sitting on the front steps. No return address, just a little handwritten note. Enjoy your stay. Make sure to stay warm. At first it seemed kind of cute, but inside the package was a small box of matches. Weird, but harmless enough. Christina laughed and joked that people in upstate New York were a little odd, and we brushed it off. The next 2 days were perfect. Long hikes through the snow, hot drinks by the fireplace, total peace and quiet. Snow had been falling steadily since we arrived. Not quite a blizzard since there wasn't much wind or fog, but enough to make the landscape look untouched. Beautiful. The master bedroom where we slept was upstairs, with massive windows overlooking the frozen lake. The roof, or at least the windows, must have been thin, because you could hear the snowflakes pattering softly at night. There was even a skylight, so we fell asleep to the glow of the snowy sky. But on the third night, sometime after midnight, I woke up to a sound. At first, all I noticed was the storm. The snow had gotten much heavier while I slept, and outside now resembled a blizzard. But beneath that I heard something else, man-made, mechanical, not the natural sounds of the wilderness. I got out of bed quietly, not wanting to wake Christina, and looked out the window. My stomach dropped. A snowmobile. It was crawling slowly across the frozen lake. Not exactly unusual. People ride snowmobiles on frozen lakes all the time. But the timing was strange. Who the hell would be out here at this hour in a snowstorm? The driver moved cautiously, like they weren't sure the ice would hold. Then they stopped. I watched as they climbed off and started waving their arms frantically, as if in distress. It looked like they were yelling, but I couldn't make out the words. Then I realized they were facing directly toward our house. I woke Christina and told her. She was alarmed, but I said I'd check. I got dressed, pulled on my boots, and stepped outside into the freezing night. The moment I opened the door, I heard the woman's voice clearly. "Thank God someone's there. Please help. My little boy, he's lost out here in the storm." She sounded hysterical, crying, desperate. My heart sank. A child alone in this weather wouldn't last long. I told Christina to stay inside, then hurried across the frozen lake toward her. She was bundled up in a thick fur coat, her hair tied in a braid, pacing near the snowmobile. She said her son had run away from home, and she was searching for him. That statement made me pause. Run away? Out here? At night? In a blizzard? At first I expected her to say something like he had fallen off the snowmobile, which would have been strange enough. But this story made no sense. And then something else clicked. The ice was completely solid. There was no danger of anyone falling through. I was about to press her for details when she said something that froze me in place. "Do you still have those matches?" She was smiling. For a split second I didn't understand. Then it hit me. The package. The note. She had left it, not the host. Before I could react, she pulled a gun from her coat. My blood ran cold. She demanded my wallet and phone. I handed them over. What else could I do? Within seconds, she climbed back onto the snowmobile and disappeared into the whiteout storm. Heart racing, I sprinted back toward the house, shouting for Christina to call the police. She was already on the phone by the time I burst through the door. I locked every entrance and kept pacing, staring out the windows, half expecting to see the snowmobile circle back. The police arrived about an hour later. By then, fresh snow had already covered her tracks. Christina was hysterical. I was furious. This was supposed to be my escape from stress, my peace. The cops searched and found an old boat ramp on the far side of the lake. Their theory was she had entered from there. They told me there wasn't much else they could do. My phone was already offline, so tracking it was useless. The Airbnb host refunded our entire trip after I explained everything. He sounded genuinely shocked and insisted he knew nothing about the package. Still, something felt off. How could that woman have known we'd be there? Why go to such elaborate lengths just for a wallet and phone? I even suspected my ex-wife for a while, imagining her laughing at my expense. As paranoid as that sounds, it stuck with me for months. Even now, I can't explain it. Maybe the woman was just disturbed, maybe she got some twisted pleasure out of it. But one thing's for sure, those matches weren't a harmless gift. They were a warning, and I'll never forget the smile on her face when she asked about them.
The lake house my family owns in Northern California was always a special place for us. We only visited for a couple of weeks each summer, but it held some of my favorite childhood memories. It was a 2-story home with an attic, and when my sister and I were little, we'd drag our sleeping bags up there, sometimes even our puppy, and pretend we were camping. There was a tiny window that looked out over the lake, and we'd spend hours peeking through it, spying on people below. By our early teens, we'd outgrown those attic adventures not long after our grandparents passed away. My parents inherited their furniture, and while the bigger pieces found a place inside, the smaller heirlooms were crammed into the attic. It was bittersweet, knowing Nana and Pop's belongings were stored away like that, but in some strange way, it felt like they were still watching over us. As we got older, it became harder to visit the house. Between college and my parents' work schedules, we could barely manage a week together each year. They didn't want to rent the house out, worried that strangers might damage the antiques. So the place mostly sat empty, with landscapers keeping up appearances. A few years back, though, my parents met a local elderly veteran who worked as an antique restorationist. Eventually, they signed a year-long lease with him. He was a disfigured man with white hair, a greasy beard, and a gravelly, unsettling voice. My dad respected him because of his military service, insisting he deserved a good deal. My sister and I didn't have a say, but we weren't thrilled. The thought of him living in our lake house full-time was unsettling. At first, things seemed fine. The landscapers checked in now and then, mostly to make sure he was okay. But months later, they called my mum with concerns. They'd often caught him sitting on the porch, staring at kids down by the lake. They hinted at other disturbing behavior too. My mum was furious. She begged my dad to end the lease, calling it irresponsible to let someone like that stay in our family's home. After months of arguments, my dad relented. When the lease ended, he told the man the house needed major repairs and utilities would be cut off. The man left without a fight. My mum was relieved, and I was glad too. It had always felt wrong that he had such open access to our house. A year later, after my sister graduated college, my parents decided to celebrate with a summer trip back to the lake. They brought along their new dog, a black lab mix named Bear. We arrived around sunset. Since the house was empty of food, we left Bear inside and went to dinner. Before we left, I noticed him pacing, ears perked, acting restless, but I brushed it off. When we returned, the air felt wrong the moment we walked in. Bear was sprawled on the floor at the foot of the stairs, panting heavily, blood pooling beneath him. My sister screamed. My mum pulled out her phone, already dialing. My dad didn't say a word. He went straight to the kitchen, grabbed a knife, and motioned for me to follow him. We searched the house slowly, hearts pounding. When we reached the top floor, my dad froze. I followed his gaze and saw it. The attic hatch. It wasn't wide open, just cracked. But through the gap, I saw the faint glow of a flashlight. Fear rooted me in place. My dad, though, didn't hesitate. He yanked the hatch open and charged up the ladder. I stayed below, trembling, waiting to hear a struggle. But no fight came. After a long silence, my dad climbed back down, whispering to me, "It's him." The old tenant. Mum rushed upstairs, and when she realized, she lost it, screaming at the top of her lungs. She had already called the police. My dad, however, looked torn, almost conflicted. The police arrived quickly. They climbed into the attic and dragged him out. He looked frail, sickly, but he still had one of our house keys in his pocket. That infuriated my mum, since my dad had promised he'd changed the locks. Bear survived, though he was badly injured. But the real shock came afterward. My dad refused to press charges. No matter how much my mum and sister fought with him, he wouldn't do it. It turned into one of the biggest arguments my parents ever had. I never understood why my dad showed so much sympathy for a man who had broken into our home and nearly killed our dog. That was a year ago. We haven't been back to the lake house since. As much as I loved that place growing up, the memory of what happened has poisoned it, and I don't think I'll ever step foot inside again.
This happened last summer. I was 20 years old at the time. My name's Kevin. My friend James comes from a seriously wealthy family. His dad's an IP lawyer who contracts with the US government, or something like that. They've got properties scattered all over the country, and even a few international ones. That's the kind of wealth we're talking about. One of those houses sits on a relatively large but secluded lake. The lake isn't massive enough that you can't see the houses across from you, but it would be a serious workout to swim from one side to the other. James's parents were never around, so he had pretty much unlimited access to the lake house, with their permission, of course. There's something about being out on that lake that makes you feel untouchable, almost invincible. It's different from the beach, more private, more exclusive. I've always hoped I'd be successful enough to own something like it one day. Big, fancy homes lined the perimeter of the lake, but most of them were dark and empty. Vacation homes for people who barely ever used them. Kind of sad, but the upside was that James could throw insane parties without worrying about neighbors calling the cops. But that night was different. It wasn't a party. It was just the two of us. I'd just gotten out of a 3-year relationship and badly needed a night with my best friend. We were out on the dock with a couple beers talking about life, when I noticed a light flashing across the water. At first, I thought it was the sunset reflecting off a window, but no matter how I moved my head, it kept flickering. It wasn't random either. It was deliberate. 3 short bursts, 3 long ones, 3 short again. I told James about it, and the two of us stared across the lake. After a second, he snapped his fingers. "It's Morse code," he said. I looked at him like he was crazy. "When the hell did you learn Morse code?" "I don't," he said. "But 3 short, 3 long, 3 short, that's SOS. I pulled out my phone to fact check, but he was right. Maybe I'm dumb for not knowing that, but obscure codes aren't really my thing. The flashing kept up for another minute, then stopped abruptly. We just sat there staring. I didn't know what to think. Could have been a prank. Could have been someone actually in trouble. James immediately said we should call the cops, but we'd been drinking and weren't even legal yet. I was already fighting a DUI charge at the time. Another run-in with police was the last thing I needed. James didn't like that answer, but we couldn't come up with any explanation besides someone being in danger. We figured it could be a fall, a kidnapping, something. But then why wouldn't they just call the police themselves? Still, we've always been those adventurous, reckless guys. We decided to check it out ourselves, and if it turned out serious, we'd call the cops then. We went inside, grabbed a couple of James' brother's switchblades. The kid was kind of weird and had knives everywhere, just for peace of mind. James wanted to drive over, but I said absolutely not. My situation was already bad enough. If we weren't driving, there was only one option left. We dragged James's dad's kayak down to the water. At first we were laughing, hyped about our little adventure, but the farther we got from shore, the quieter we became. Both of us were realizing how dumb this was, but neither wanted to be the one to say it. By the time we were halfway across, the sun had set. It wasn't pitch black yet. The lake houses provided some light, but it was unsettling. We could see the house now. Big like the others, but obviously neglected. The dock was half collapsed, one side sunken into the water. The flashing had stopped, which felt like a bad sign. We'd planned to tie the kayak to the dock, but with it so unstable, we had to beach it on the yard instead. We climbed out carefully, adrenaline surging. The light had come from the second floor. James wanted to leave, call the police from his house. But there was no cell service on the lake and no Wi-Fi unless we went inside. I reminded him we'd explored dozens of abandoned places before. I know how dumb it sounds. Everyone I've told this story to says the same thing, but neither of us had a reputation for making good decisions. We didn't dare knock on the front door. We crept around the side until we found an unlocked window. Silently, we slipped inside. The house wasn't just abandoned, it was empty. Stripped bare, no furniture, no junk, no sign anyone had ever lived there. The walls and floors were completely bare. We moved through the rooms carefully, looking for the stairs. Every room was the same, empty. Finally, we found the staircase and made our way up. I kept track of the window in my head, ready for a quick escape. We reached the room where the light had come from. I pressed my ear to the door, nothing. I glanced at James. He nodded. I pushed the door open. Empty, except for one thing by the window. I tiptoed closer. It was an old projector, facing outward. Alarm bells exploded in my head. This wasn't a distress signal, this was a trap. James must have realized it at the same time because he bolted, sprinting down the hall without even trying to be quiet. I turned and ran after him. As we hit the stairs, I heard a door swing open. A closet, maybe, followed by rapid thumping. Footsteps. We flew down the stairs and through the house back to the window. James dove through first. I followed. As I was climbing out, I heard the footsteps pounding down the stairs behind me. I didn't even look. I landed outside and ran for the lake. James was already there, but the kayak was gone. I turned just in time to see someone running from the side of the house toward us. He was big, fast, definitely an adult. I couldn't make out his face. I yanked out my switchblade, ready to fight, but James didn't even hesitate. He dove straight into the lake. Sneakers, hoodie, everything. I followed. The water was freezing, but adrenaline drowned out the pain. We swam hard, aiming for the light from James's house on the far side of the lake. It looked miles away. That swim felt endless. But somehow, on pure terror and adrenaline, we made it. We dragged ourselves onto James's dock, shivering violently. We ran inside, locked every door, and called the police. It took them almost an hour to show up. Ridiculous. They crossed the lake to investigate, stayed there for a while, then came back with exactly what I expected. Nothing. The house had been abandoned for years. No signs of recent activity, no footprints, no gear, nothing but an empty shell. They weren't happy with us. We got the whole, "Why didn't you call sooner?" speech. James's parents were even angrier when they found out. I wasn't invited back to the lake house after that. James said his parents threatened to sue the town and the police for not investigating further. As for me, I still don't know what happened that night. I don't know who was in that house, why they set that trap, or what they would have done if we hadn't run. Most of my friends think the person got cold feet at the last second. I don't even want to imagine what would have happened if they hadn't.